Okay.
Yes,
Okay. No problem. Let me just get my slide ready.
of course.
Mm.
Hey, everyone. Okay, so Aslam's recording the meeting, your co-host, and I think we'll begin. And Aslam, you're going to keep an eye on the waiting room.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so just for the purposes of the recording, I'm Jo Rowe, Senior Lecturer in Humanitarian Affairs and Sustainable Development, and Programme Leader for our Masters in International Humanitarian Affairs with Health Sciences at the University of York. And it's a real pleasure and privilege today to be joined by photojournalist Ala Khier, who was born in Darfur in Sudan and then lived mostly in Khartoum, Sudan, until the recent conflict erupted. Ala is the co-founder of the Sudanese Photographers Group. Through photography, he actively engages with people and places, creating personal perspectives and narratives about his immediate space. His work has been showcased in exhibitions and festivals around the world. Ala runs The Other Vision, a photography platform that focuses on photography and education and training in Sudan, through which he assists young photographers and connects Sudanese artists to the rest of the continent. Through TOV, he engages with the public in an attempt to address social issues and drive change in Sudan. Today, Ala is going to share with us some of his work, to tell some of the stories, including his own, of living through conflict in Darfur and Sudan. Following this, we'll have a question and answer session. So please, everyone, think of your fantastic questions like always. Ala, I'll now hand over to you to share your screen and begin.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here to talk about the conflict in Sudan and how it affected so many people, including myself. And I think we are on a time where most people, or even the major news agencies, forgot to talk about what's going on in the country. I know the world is going through tough times in Palestine, in Congo, and in Sudan as well. And it's important to raise awareness about what's going on. I'm a photographer, and photography is what I do best. And I think for me, it's the better tool to tell the story, and that's why I'm here to share with you some of the images that I took all the way from the beginning of the year 2023 until now. And through these images, I will take you along in a journey. I call it a journey because until now I don't know how it will end or where it will take me or take the whole country as well. So yeah, and during this presentation, please feel free to stop me to ask for questions or any information about the photograph or so. Um, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes. So I was born in a town called Niala in South Darfur. But just like what was happening in most parts of the country, Darfur was underdeveloped, still underdeveloped, and many families decided to leave the countryside towards Khartoum. So when I was 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, my family moved to Khartoum, and I grew up in Khartoum. But I kept connected very much to Darfur and to my relatives there, and we keep going back during the school holidays. Um, Darfur went through very long and tough war that was started in 2020 and 2003. And 2023 was the 20th year of war in Darfur. There were ups and downs, but at the beginning of 2023, it was much calmer, and people started to restart their lives in Darfur. And that was a time where I decided to go back home, try to reconnect with where I'm from, and try to know Darfur even more. So I started working on a personal project called Darfur Maybe Home Again, in which I tried to visit places that I knew, places where my relatives live, and also places that um, I have some form of connection with. This image was taken in Jabal Mara. It's 3 hours drive from where I was born. I don't have uh, any direct connection with the place, but it's one of the places that I've always been fascinated with. And during the war in Darfur, Jabal Mara went through extreme uh, clashes and fights, and most of the villages in the mountains had to uh, move to other parts of the state. Most of them came to the cities like Niala or went to Khartoum. But from 2010, people started to go back and restart their lives in the mountain. I started visiting these places, talking to people, try to get to know people, try to get to know the place, and also connect back to it. And in one of these trips, I met Adam. Adam is one of the community leaders from the outskirts of a city called Al Fashir. But in 2003, after the war started spreading in Darfur, Adam and his community had to flee their village and move to El Fashir. They live in a small camp, not far from the center of the city. It's just like an extension of the city, a camp called Abu Shok. Adam, with his family, lived in a very small plot of land that is being allocated for each IDP. And they lived in this place for almost 20 years. And it is where he lives until now. His family expanded. He had kids and grandkids, and the three generations are still living in this small house. And to think about camps, and we always consider that it's a temporary solution to a conflict, but 20 years, it's a lifetime. And to see that not only kids but grandkids being born in the same place in a camp tells us about how severe war could be. And it's easy to forget that people are affected, and becoming an IDP or to move from your place to another is never a temporary solution. I went through different areas in Darfur, um, and I was actually amazed by the resilience of people. Despite what happened, the unspoken atrocities that happened to people in Darfur, especially women, and yet people kept on trying to rebuild their homes, rebuild their life, and restart again. And while all of this is happening, Khartoum was starting to politically destabilize, and there were signs of an upcoming conflict. But um, no one really did think that this conflict will be this extreme. They thought it will be just another clash, and people will continue to go on with their life, just like what happened during the revolution and during the coup in 2022. However, the demography of the state of Darfur has changed a lot, and because of the shift from agriculture to living by the city, forced so many farmers to do other kind of jobs in order to sustain their lives. Um, I met so many men, women, and families who started a very different thing from what they used to do, just to continue living in cities like Niala. This is Halima. She was a farmer. She had a big land in the outskirts of Niala. But since 2005, she lives in the city, and the only way she can earn income is by laying bricks. And she has been laying bricks for 15 years in an attempt to feed her family and also send her kids to school. This image was taken in January 2023, and at that time she had one son who is already in university and two daughters in high school. Uh, this is al-Bashar. She lives in a camp called Zamzam. It's also in Al-Fashir. She'd been living in the camp for 20 years exactly. And she says that she lost everything back at her village, including her relatives, her husband, and the only place that she can continue living in is the camp. And although there were talks of changing the camps to become extension of the city, many of these IDPs mentally have changed their status from someone who moved from a village or from the house, from the homes, to living in the city. They think of it as a solution, like this is a better state for them. But after the conflict happened again in Khartoum and spread to Darfur, al-Bashar had to flee to Chad. Now she lives in a camp in Adri, in the east side of Chad, and the whole process of relocation is happening to her again after 20 years of trying to settle in a place that is not really her home. Going back to Jabal Mara, what was special about Jabal Mara that uh, it was almost a close community, a single tribe living mostly not really isolated, but they are less dependent on other cities or towns. They are self-sufficient. They cultivate their land. They have cattle. The latest movement that happened before the war in Sudan, where many of the Arab militias started to move and relocate to the mountains, have threatened their mobility, as there were so many cases of rapes for women who go to farm their lands. And in this part of the country, most of the farmers are the females, are the women. And they had to reduce their farming activities to a very confined area, because if you leave these areas, there's a very high chance that especially younger women will be kidnapped or raped. This was the beginning of 2023. I was trying to focus more on Darfur, but most of my photography has been about the place where I grew up in. It was about Khartoum. From Darfur, I went to a city in the east of Sudan called Port Sudan for a short break. Excuse me. But then I came back to Khartoum on the 13th of April, just 2 days before the conflict started, just to pause for a little bit at home to recharge. And then I was planning to go back to Darfur on after Eid holidays, which was the end of April. This image was taken on the first day of conflict. The conflict started in the morning after people already got to their offices. It was a Saturday, it was a Sunday, sorry, and not so many people were working, but those who had to go to work, they are already at their offices. And suddenly in the center of the city, extreme conflict between two armed groups. It felt like it's a major event, but at the same time, the same sense or the same feeling of this will end soon was there. So people were not really worried or afraid, but most people were just trying to get back home before things escalate a little bit. The second day of the conflict, the city was almost a ghost town. Nobody was leaving the house because there were so many stray bullets. Even inside the house, you will start hearing bullets hitting your building, and it was extremely dangerous to just be outside the building. Most people stayed inside their homes. In some areas, they're even hiding under beds and furniture to avoid any explosion or so on. I stayed in my apartment in downtown Khartoum for 2 weeks, but then I had to move from the city center because it was getting extreme and more dangerous. Water and electricity were already off, and my first option was to go to my parents' home, which was in the outskirts of Omdurman, almost at the edge of the city. It was much more quiet and calm. So naturally, as a photographer, I wanted to take pictures. I wanted to photograph, to document what's going on. But Khartoum or Sudan in general, the government and also the militias, they always hated journalists, and specifically they hate photographers. There were extreme targeting of people who were known to be photographers. And actually, if you are found on the street holding a camera or even filming with your mobile phone, you will always be accused as a spy for the other side. So the risk was you will be captured by both sides, or worst case scenario, you will be shot by a sniper. And 2 weeks into the war, there were already too many snipers scattered around the city from both sides, and they will not hesitate to shoot if they cannot recognize who you really are. I went to a hospital in the south of Khartoum. It was one of the few operating hospitals in the city, and so many civilians were shot, many by stray bullets. They don't know who hit them. Some bullet landed at their place inside the home, and some were actually shot by snipers. Unfortunately, many people died, and few survived these stray bullets. And this was the only time in Khartoum during the conflict where I was able to use my camera and film. After these images, I went back to my parents' home in Omdurman, which is a little far. I stayed there for almost a month. And to go from Khartoum to Omdurman, I had to leave all my equipment behind because it was a little dangerous to travel with equipment. So I just had my backpack, my important documents, and my data, my hard drives. After staying in Omdurman for almost a month and realized that this war will take a very long time, and I have to move forward. I have to document what's going on, and also I have to make a living because 2 months without work is a little bit difficult, especially when you have a big family to take care of. I started traveling to Wad Madani. Wad Madani is you can say, the second largest city in Sudan, and it was the first city that most IDPs, or people who are fleeing the war from Khartoum, went to. So by the first month, there were already thousands of IDPs arriving in Wad Madani, mainly living in host centers, schools. And in this picture, after the city became actually full and not able to take any more IDPs, people started living in abandoned chicken farms, poultry farms. This particular image was taken in one of the farms northern of Madani. It was abandoned for almost 15 years, and people still decided to go on and live into these abandoned hangars. There were many insects, scorpions, and snakes. It was dangerous, but most people say the dangers here are much less than staying in Khartoum. In this farm, there were almost 1,200 IDPs living around the farm, and this was a common case around Wad Madani. During my time there, I started talking to people, and it was always difficult and emotional when you run into someone that you already knew. I knew these two women. One of them was assistant pharmacist working in Khartoum, but she had to move out with her family. And Rahama is also, she was a tea lady in Khartoum. Now she lives in a school in Madani. I don't know where she is now, but when the image was taken, she was living in a school in Wad Madani. And what was amazing about these people that they always try to help. Both of them were very active in the camp, trying to help the people who need more, try to help by cooking meals for others, and share what they have. It was abnormal that, usually wars in Africa start happening in the outskirts, but for a war to happen in the center of the country, in the capital, many of the people who were relocated or became IDPs, they had skills, and it was easy to notice that like once they get to a safer place, they always try to help, especially people who work in medical staff, people who have experience handling um, difficult times. And this is Saida. She's a medical doctor, but in this center, she was just volunteering to help with the management of the health center. And there were many examples of people like Saida who tried to help the community while she's there. This was also taken in one of the schools in Wad Madinah that hosted about 400 people. Uh, this was a theater group from Khartoum who were also relocated to Madani, and during their time, they conducted some plays to help people to overcome the trauma for especially children, and many people, many especially children, were attending this kind of plays, and it was just amazing to see people think about these kind of things while themselves they needed help. This image was in a shelter that was constructed by two UN agencies, I think UNHCR and WFP. No, sorry, UNICEF and WFP. Um, there was a well-known center in Khartoum called Maigoma. It's an orphanage that hosts big number of abandoned children in Khartoum, and it has been operating for a number of years. So you'll find all kind of ages living in that center in Khartoum. Unfortunately, during the conflict, Al Maigoma Center uh, is located in a very hot zone, and the clashes and the fighting was extreme around the center. However, they were the latest to evacuate from the city. They were moved to another center in Wad Madani, but not long after they moved, clashes reached Madani again, and many of these children had to be evacuated, living in different families in villages and towns south of Wad Madani. Overall, the conditions in Wad Madani, it was not a typical kind of camps. It was basically people trying to makeshift, homes in hostels, schools, and very difficult places to live in. And this was all happening during a very hot summer. June, July was very tough, and to have big numbers of people living in very confined spaces with uh, electricity was an issue, and of course, drinking water. And you can imagine the rest of hygiene issues and access to medical support and so on. Most of the people who were suffering a lot were the elders, especially those who were dependent on continuous supply of medicine, and children who were exposed to many diseases because of the living conditions in these camps. I've stayed in Wad Madani for a while, but then I started traveling to other places around the country. I did not have a certain plan of what to do next, but I just try to go with the flow. I find a job here, try to get to a new place, try to talk about what's happening in a different place. And the theme was very common. Extreme living conditions, lack of basic necessities, and uh, people who have lost contacts with the rest of the family members. I met so many families that were isolated from the parents. You hear sometimes the father went to get something and they never met him again. And you will see families who crossed huge distances trying to find a safer place. This image was taken in Port Sudan, where I met Muhammad and his sister Alia and his mother Zainab. They are all from South Kordofan. But when the clashes started in South Kordofan, they traveled first to Madani. Then Madani also fall into the conflict. Then they traveled all the way to Port Sudan. And these are the twins, Suhaila and I always forget the name, Suhaila and Salma and Suhaila. They are 13 years old. They are from my city, from Darfur, from Niala. Also in May, when the clashes started in Niala, they disconnected from their father. So the twins and the younger brother and with the mother, they traveled east, just trying to go to a safer place. They went to Al Nuhud, then Al Ubaid, Kosti, Madani. Then when the clashes reached Madani, they traveled all the way to Port Sudan. During a period of a month and a half, they crossed more than 2,400 kilometers to find a safer place. Until this moment, they live in a dormitory, girls' dormitory in Port Sudan, in the eastern side of Sudan. In the same place, I found this young woman, Ramah Musa. Ramah is from Darfur as well, but she has always been living in Port Sudan because that's where she studies. She is in her final year in university, and for the past 2 years she did not go back because she just wanted to finish university and then go back to her family. Um, since the war started, many parts of the country lost mobile phone coverage. And since April 2023, she never contacted her family directly. But the good thing is, through friends who uh, moved around Darfur, she knew that her family is fine and well, and also she managed to send them information that she's okay and well, and she's doing fine. But most of the students from Darfur who are in other parts of the country, they lost contact with their families, and they are in a situation where they are basically stuck. There is no clear future ahead, and there is just almost nothing they could do. Um, in one of the schools in Port Sudan, I also find the community of uh, West Africans. The two women here are from Cote d'Ivoire. They used to study at the University of Africa in Khartoum. But when the war started, they fled the war from in Khartoum towards Port Sudan, hoping to be evacuated to their country. But many of those non-Sudanese who were stuck in this war and are from countries that were not able to evacuate them, ended up, living in Port Sudan, waiting for a solution by the UN agencies. But until this moment, there's a big community of especially Africans who were students in Sudan who are stuck in school camps like this. After Port Sudan, I was trying to go to South Sudan mainly because when the displacement started in Sudan, people who could afford to travel and leave the country mostly left up north towards Egypt and other countries. And the rest of the country either fled south towards South Sudan or west towards Chad. When I was going to South Sudan, I passed a camp not far from the border called Sangur. And in this camp, I met Hannah. Hannah is actually a South Sudanese. And in 2010, there was a conflict in the northern part of South Sudan where her and her family became refugees in Sudan. She lived in Sudan for a while, mostly in abandoned homes in Khartoum, while trying to find small jobs here and there and survive. She got married 2 years ago, and then the conflict happened. She had two children. She was separated with her husband during the conflict while escaping Khartoum, but she managed to make it with her kids Sangur camp, not far from the borders of South Sudan. During this time in the camp, she lost the two children, and she continued living there with her relatives who are still there. Hannah says that uh, in the past 15 years, this is the first time she owns a room, a place to stay. All her life was basically moving from a place to another, and even in Khartoum, squatting a home, then go to another abandoned building. And to think about it, Sangur camp is one of the worst camps I've ever seen. And I think by any standard, it could be one of the worst camps in the world. It's a camp in a very isolated area. And during rain season, the whole camp gets separated from anything. And even today, the camp is actually holding three times of the capacity that the camp was designed for, and that's mainly because many of the South Sudanese refugees who used to stay in Khartoum and areas around Khartoum, uh, while they're going back, they ended up staying in this particular camp in the borders. This image was taken in September, and this is another image from Sangur camp. This is Teresa. Also a similar case with Hannah. Um, she left South Sudan to Khartoum, and now again she's a refugee and trying to return to South Sudan, while uh, the village that she is from actually is not longer there, does no longer exist because everyone fled the village. Uh, During September, there was a very big number of Sudanese refugees trying to cross into South Sudan, and that's mainly because of the conflict in the western and southern part of the country. This image was taken in a small open area right after the border crossing point, where most travelers, spend the night in. And during that time, an average of 3,000 refugees and returnees cross every day into South Sudan. South Sudan itself, especially the northern side of the country, depends a lot on Sudan. And because of the dense forest and the river that is hard to navigate because of the heavy vegetation on the river, uh, it's a poorer side of the country. South Sudan itself as a country needs a lot of support. And to take in this number of refugees and IDPs, it's actually very complicated. Most people prefer not to stay in Rank. Rank is the first town to encounter while coming from Sudan. Most people prefer to think of traveling south towards bigger cities like Malakal or all the way to Juba because there's a better chance of surviving there than waiting in a city or a town like Rank. To travel from Rank to Juba, you either take the expensive $300 flight, and which was something difficult for most of these refugees and IDPs. And the other option is just to continue the trip, part of it by boats and part of it by trucks. This image was taken at the port at Rank. People use these metal barges to travel to Malakal. It's a 320-kilometer ride, but because it's upriver and the boat is huge and packed with people, this 320 kilometers takes 2 days on water. And you can imagine being cramped in a metal boat for 2 days. In one of the camps in Rank, I met Khalda, and she was just another example of how strong people could be regardless of their age. She is 19 years old. Uh, April was her first time ever to visit Sudan. She lives in Saudi Arabia, where she was born. Her family lives there. She finished high school and uh, she wanted to study medicine. and it's difficult for non-Saudi people to study medicine in Saudi Arabia. So the family decided that they want to move back to Sudan mainly to get their daughter to go to the medical school, and she got accepted and everything. They came to Sudan just a week before the war, and then the war happened. The family was in Khartoum. After a week of conflict in Khartoum, the father and the uncle decided to go out and get supplies. They never came back, never met the father again. And her mother and her traveled all the way south, crossing into South Sudan, uh, with no plan, just mainly hoping to be somewhere safer and maybe find a better future for the daughter. What amazing and just hard to think about is how much of difficulties they went through, and all this time she tried to hide it from her mom because the mother is feeling guilty that because of the family decision they ended up here. And for someone who is 19 to think and consider these kind of things is just I don't know how to describe it. There were so many stories and so many pictures, but what I shared here is just you can say an intro to the lives of so many people that I met along the way. The conflict in Sudan is actually far from over. I think in terms of political dialogue and what's going on ground, it feels like it's just the second day. Nothing is happening. Both sides of the conflict are extremely reluctant to take power, while at the end, people who are suffering are the civilians. And yeah, I think that was the last image. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ala. Through your photographs are incredible. I follow Ala on Instagram. You can too if you want to stay and follow his work. I think through sharing those stories, you've really helped us understand the different realities and challenges faced on the ground. What really struck me was when you said about how when the conflict first erupted in Khartoum, was that at first there was a sense of normalcy, that people have lived through such erratic outbreaks of conflict that when it happens, it felt normal for so many people. And then secondly, that it's the bravery of photographers such as yourself and journalists on the ground that are risking their lives to take these photographs and share the stories of these people. And lastly, something that we really talk about throughout our course is the role of the local communities, and how when a crisis hits, it is those people on the ground that will help each other and do whatever they can to help their neighbours and their communities. And with that, I'd really like to open up for questions and answers. So please be welcome to either put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. I say, Saria, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Oh, sorry, my webcam was tilted all the way. Hi, everybody. First of all, let me say a tremendous thank you to Ala for this incredibly important work that you've shared with us today. And also a massive thank you to Joe and Eslam for organizing and creating this really important and necessary space. So by way of an introduction, I'm Saira. I also work at the University of York, where I work on arts, conflict, and the justice imagination in South Sudan. So I have a couple of questions, but of course, feel free to answer as many or as little of them as you want. So my first question is perhaps a little bit more personal, because I'm really curious, Ala, to learn if you're open to sharing that. I saw that your background was originally in mechanical engineering, and I wondered what motivated or inspired the shift in your life to move towards photography. My second question, as I said, I work in South Sudan, which, as you know from your own experiences, is an environment where photography as a specific form of social engagement is very challenging because of the prohibitions and the legal restrictions around the use of photography. And I wondered if you've ever encountered those kinds of particular challenges and how you maybe navigate them. And then lastly, in sharing what you have today, which is really, really important, I'm also inspired to think a lot about the research of one particular academic named Frank Muller and his work around conceptualizing peace photography. And what I think is really interesting about that is Frank Muller makes this argument that peace photography needs to be understood as a domain of photography that's distinct from war photography. And in order to do that, photographs, to be peace photography, they need to visualize the expectation of peace in ways that aren't still bound to the damage and the deficit that characterizes war photography. And I wonder if you think that you'll ever be able to do that in your work. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that I'm here. Well, you asked actually tough questions. I'll try to answer all. But first of all, I think I will go back to Dr. Joe's question. The past 4 years in Khartoum, there was so much political change. Politics in Khartoum is always linked to the army. So over the past few years, we did hear lots of clashes. You know, it's normal to hear machine gun fire and so on and so on. When the conflict started in Khartoum, it was a little bit more extreme than the previous one, because in 2022 we had a coup, and during that coup there was some military movement. So yes, to some extent, I think people took that as a normal thing. So I think the natural reaction for all of us Sudanese people, including myself, I just went back home. You know, I bought lunch. I did not even think of the coming days. I thought this will take just, you know, a few hours, and it will be over. And that was actually what had been announced on the news. It will take a few hours and it will be resolved. But you know, day after day, it started to get more extreme. So yeah. The second question, I think the Sudanese culture is a lot pro helping each other. And that was very clear during the first days of war, especially because most of people who fled the city, you know, were helped by the others. You know, someone who has a car will help people to take other people with them. There were so many civil communities who arranged buses to take people out. And those who remained in Khartoum, there were so many initiatives to buy supplies, to get medicine. There were some doctors who were trying to volunteer to go to the people who needed medical support in their home, despite that there's war outside in the street. So I think supporting each other was very clear in this war, and it's still happening until today in Sudan. The question about restrictions in photography, but I think the first question about how did I get into photography? I think when I started photography, it was just a hobby and a way to, you know, escape the complex engineering side of life. Photography for me was something I do in my free time, but slowly I started to drift more into it. And I think also being in Sudan in times like the revolution, you will start to use the camera differently. But I think for me personally, photography is something I discovered along the way while just living. And I felt more passionate about it than engineering, and I started doing it more, and I started to become more serious in it. And I think also it's one of the reasons I decided to remain in Sudan after the economic collapse, because I felt as a photographer, Sudan for me is a place where I can create a lot more work, I can engage socially, and I think my photographs as well could help somehow. I don't know how, but that's what I was doing before the war. So yes, I did document the political change. I did document people going in the streets. Always my perspective was thinking as a Sudanese, as someone from my point of view, what I want to see and how I see the things that are happening in front of me. And restrictions in South Sudan and Sudan as well, I think it's always there. Even when there was no war, there was no conflict, governments in both countries are so against photography. And it's so much to the point that I think even the civilians are somehow afraid of the camera. It takes some time before I managed to maybe find ways to break this barrier with the civilians. But with the government, there is no solution. We always have to be careful, sometimes rely on the help of friends in the UN agencies to give you access. But it's always difficult. It's actually difficult just to travel with a camera in your bag. In checkpoints, in borders, in ports. Like right now, if I want to travel to South Sudan, I have to think hard about how will I take my camera, or should I find someone there who could lend me a camera while I'm there? So the difficulty and the restriction and of course the extreme harassment that we'll get from the police when they find you with a camera, it's just unbelievable. But at the end, I think that does not stop me or my colleagues to stop going out and try to photograph, because I think there's not so much of information and images about what's going on out there, about what's going on in Sudan. So yeah, did I miss any question? Oh yes, Frank Muller. I read a small article by Susan Sontag called regarding
The pain of others.
yes, regarding the pain of others. And I think to answer your question, it's all about the perspective. I think the way photography is marketed nowadays worldwide, as photographers, you also have to make an income. News agencies and the main media outlets require certain kind of images. But I think the honest and simple interpretation of what's going on in the media space, that is actually more important and critical. And I think even while I'm photographing during this tough time, I did have the chance to cover the conflict, but it was never one of my interests to do the war side, although it was not that difficult, but it is just more dangerous. But I felt for me, I will just do something I'm not really engaged with. I prefer to talk about people, talk about experiences, and all that. During my trips, I always talk to people. The stories you hear from people help you get a better perspective of what's going on. And yes, I think we need to talk more about peace photography. We need the world to start paying more attention to images that matter than the images that we see now that are just a wow factor.
Thank you. That was really good questions, really good answers. Thank you. Faz, I think your hand was up next, and then Jack.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks, Islam, for participating, organizing this, and I really appreciate that. Going through this personalized pictures. It's sometimes we forget when we're talking about 300,000 people displaced, we don't see individual stories. So it's a very strong reminder that behind this huge numbers, we always see that individual peoples. So thank you, Allah, for bringing that into perspective. I wanted to ask you maybe a specific question about Sudan conflict. The country has been in conflict the last, 20 odd years right now, and it does not seem that it's going to go away very time soon. It's such an unfortunate statement, Allah, when you say that when the violence erupted, it was just a normal day, which means that people there, the population living there have accepted it's just a part of it. They've normalized violence, which is also very scary to think about it. The kid's probably going to grow in about 20 odd years, and they will just think that's a part of life. And you talked about Adam, who is in IDP, 20 years, second generation. They already have grandchildren over there. How do you find the motivation to get up and carry on what you do, knowing things might never change? I want to say that one colleague or someone mentioned that what humanitarians do is, when we bring food, we just don't bring food and supplies, we bring hope. And that's something that that's strongly resonated with me. I wanted to ask you, what is your personal motivation to get up and doing what you do, risking so much for sometime I can say so little? So Thank you, Allah.
Well,
Forward.
to answer simply, the simple answer is I really don't know. But being from Darfur, I've actually moved around a lot throughout my life. And as a Sudanese, we ask ourselves a lot of questions, especially about sense of belonging. It always feels like the country did not really have the time to, to become a real country. And that's why there's so much political change, social change, conflict, and so on. And I think for me personally, like when I decided to go on and start working on a project about Darfur, um, all my relatives are from Darfur, and to hear stories from people there in Darfur, uh, being positive despite, losing everything, not once, not twice, but multiple times, like when the conflict struck, most people in Darfur lost all their jobs and businesses, people lost lives. The conflict took another phase where people started to moving into villages, and now people have to flee their homes, going back to the city, start again from zero. And I think the stories we hear from people around us, around me specifically, give me that, drive to I need to talk about this. I need people to hear about this. It does affect me, and I think anyone who really engages with people who suffer a lot and yet stay positive, it's just a different and unique feeling. And through photography, I try to reflect a little bit of that. I'm married and I have kids, and the debate always with my wife is she thinks I've done enough. I don't need to do this anymore. I just need to go out to another country and find another job. But I think especially when you're doing arts, the satisfaction in what you do is not easy to achieve if you are not, doing the thing you want to do. And I did try, to step away for a while and do something different, but I think the guilt and the disconnect I get from doing something else is just too much. I always prefer to go back, and unfortunately, it's becoming a comfort zone. I feel better when I'm doing this.
Thank you, Allah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jack, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks, Allah. It's such a pleasure, seeing all your pictures, and congratulations for all the works that you do to bring to the face of the world the knowledge of all those atrocities in Sudan. We are very proud of you. I have three questions. The first is, I noticed that in most of your pictures, there are, I mean, in your pictures are more women who appears. So why that? Is it because they are those? I mean, they are more happy to be, taking a picture, or because of the demography, or maybe because they are those who are most affected by those atrocities or by the war. And my second question is, so the work, what you do is very, as I've said, impactful work by, bringing to surface of the world knowledge of all those things happening. But I'm curious about how the communities themselves react to that when they know that you are doing this work. So sometimes I think you go, you take the pictures. Do they know that I mean, how you use those pictures, and have you sometimes try and talk to them to feedback about what you do and how do they react? And the third question, sorry to bring them all, it's very important. What I've also noticed is this aspect of the dignity of the people you are taking in pictures. And this is something sometimes photographers miss in humanitarian sector, where they, as really eager to bring these emotional effects. Sometimes they take pictures of people in a way which is, I would say, undignified. You see people with the bones attached to the skin and all those things, which can have, sometimes also convey really a negative and image of vulnerability from those people. But I see these ethics. I just want to know, so is this something you have set yourself as boundaries, or is there any code of conduct, or what's really the reasons behind this stronger sense of ethics in your work? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words. To answer your first question, I've took thousands of photographs, and I did talk to a lot of people. I do have a collection of images and stories by men as well, but usually women are the ones suffer the most, and also they are the ones to open up more, especially about emotions and how they feel. I do talk to both sides. Most of these people I met, they're usually with their, brothers, husbands, and so on. I do talk to the whole family, and I try to select the one that struck me the most, and it's usually women. I do have stories of men as well, but women's stories is much stronger, always, especially in Sudan. And one of the things I always try to do is to talk more before taking pictures. That I think break lots of boundaries. Not boundaries, but break lots of barriers between me as a photographer and the person I'm about to photograph. And it also make them, be themselves. And that's something important to me, because I always try to put myself on the place of the person who will step in front of my camera. And I want them to feel comfortable. It's always better to imagine, or to switch places and think about it from that perspective. I think that somehow enables me to think about your second question, which is ethics. The ethical part of photography is very important for me, especially in Africa. The African context, when you talk about the ethics of photography, colonial photography, war photography, and also NGO photography. Not artists, actually, photographers do often focus more on how the picture would look like than what does the photograph mean, and how will the person on the photograph feel when he sees his image being shared somewhere. And it's important to explain to people how are you going to use these images, and that's something I do at first up front. And it's always I start with telling them that this is what is happening to us, and it is our duties as Sudanese to at least tell our stories in some way, tell what's happening here. At the end, it's history. And I always think about photographs from a future point of view. If you consider that element, we want to look back through this important and difficult time of our history through our photographs. So it's important to have a photo with an honest story, and an image or a portrait that somehow reflects how I felt about that particular person. And it's even important to visually bring that on the photograph. You have to show the respect. You have to
It's 1 o'clock.
give them power. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, I see your hand is raised.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Ross and Ala, for your efforts and your dedication. حبابك يا علا. I'm also from Sudan, also fellow Sudanese. I just wanna have a small question about your experience in documenting civilian struggle during the conflict. My question is, how did your personal journey of surviving this trauma interact with intersect with your artistic process, and what are the difference between your first photo in the start of this conflict and your most recent photo in Sudan prior to your departure? How that contributed for your development as an artist? Thank you so much, وحبابك ألف.
شكرا لك محمد. Thank you يا أخي. Pleasure to meet a fellow Sudanese here. And I think this is a very important question I ask myself as well. I have been documenting displacement since 2012. I've been to so many camps in Darfur, in Blue Nile, and even in Somalia and in South Sudan. And I think it's quite a big change when you yourself is an IDP or a refugee. It's quite different. It's I think I look at it very differently while photographing now than when I started to do photographs in camps and so on. It's easier for me to connect, especially at a feeling level. It's different, you know, to move around thinking or always having in mind that you finish what you are doing here, then you go back to your home, wherever it is. From when you are there with the people, you are just trying to document your movement, your trips, and people you interact with, but you share similar worries, similar questions about future. I think in a mental level, being an IDP and a refugee in this part of the in this war enabled me to tell not the story of people only, but also my story, because I feel in a way or another their stories are now my story as well. And it's just different. I think we have a saying in Sudanese that ألف البر عوام, the one who is outside the water knows how to swim. But I think photographing while the war is affecting you as well, it's quite a different process and feeling and workflow as well.
Yeah, I feel this is a very personal, moving story. Thank you for sharing that part, especially like being affected by the conflict and actively participating. Usually, most humanitarians are pretending to be neutral, but like you're a very unique case, and it is a pleasure to attend this and get to know you.
Yeah.
I feel you put the Sudan with your individual pictures showing the resilience of the community as what we show in the masters, showcasing the cases of the impact of the individual story, bringing back Sudan, the human impact of the conflict, and bringing back Sudan to the spotlight. So I have two questions really. Any activities for international advocacy with such moving, strong pictures? It's like we all remember the story, the picture of the Syrian boy Alan on the European shores on Greece. That started the whole policy movement and moved people. And do you feel like one of your pictures can be one of those moving factors? And another thing, what was like your, I know you mentioned it, you touched on it previous, but like characteristics of this successful storytelling with your photo. And thank you very much for such a moving session.
Thank you, Islam. And well, I think my photographs are somehow, I try to take simple photographs that feels more like seeing, as Stephen Shore says it. And with that simplicity, I think somehow my photographs are bringing a different kind of attention to what's going on in Sudan. I've been trying to talk about what's going on in Sudan through photography, and I think somehow people are paying attention to what's going on through the overall, bulk of photographs. It feels like it's one connected story rather than a single image. And I think that's something I've always been interested in. I'm more of a photographer who is doing photo narratives than single images. I don't have a specific image that I think could make such a movement, but I think the total body of work that I'm building right now, it is like a case, stories of so many people surviving the war. And at the moment, I cannot say I've reached a certain point in which I would say I've done something, but I think I still need to go to Chad, where most Darfuris are had to relocate to. And I think that will allow me to connect to the first point that I started this presentation with, which was me attempting to reconnect with Darfur. By going to Chad, I think I'll be able to meet people who I talked to about 20 years of war at the beginning of the year. It will also allow me to talk to people who endured, war twice and displacement many times. I don't know how the results of that will come out, but also I'm emotionally worried because it's not always easy, to talk to people about this. Usually these dialogues before ending up with the picture, there's so many tears involved in between, and just to think about it, it's not easy, but it's something I have to continue. So I think after going to Chad, maybe I will have a clearer picture of what to do next, and maybe I will have a strong image that could help in changing the perspective and bringing more attention to what was going on in Sudan.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining, for your time today and for engaging. Ala, thank you so much just for a hugely moving and emotive conversation. And I hope we can continue this on. I'll certainly, as you know, we talked about Chad yesterday, and I want to follow your story and the challenges that you'll face as a photographer in Chad, but more importantly, the stories that you'll collect and share. Just thank you so much for your time today, and please continue to stay in touch with us.
Thank you all, and I'm actually very glad to talk about this, and thank you for the on-point questions. I hope I answered all, and yeah, maybe we'll talk again someday soon. Thank you.
That's definitely.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.